Hi, everyone. My name's Barb Moses, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Monte Carlo. We're here today with Cindi Howson, Chief Data Strategy Officer at ThoughtSpot, creator of the industry-leading business intelligence and big data analytics platform. We'll hear more from Cindi today, but prior to joining ThoughtSpot, Cindi served as VP at Gartner, where she was the lead author for the illustrious Analytics and BI Magic Quadrant, among several other assessments. She's also the creator of the BI Scorecard, one of the first industry frameworks for evaluating BI solutions. And I'm super excited to talk to Cindi today for a few reasons. One, I personally think she's one of the most interesting people in the data industry right now. And two, I think her work at ThoughtSpot is just very much at the core of one of the biggest trends in the space that we're seeing right now, which is making AI-driven analytics more useful and accessible as part of the migration that folks are going through the cloud. So Cindi, would you mind introducing yourself and just a little bit about your work?
Sure. So I feel like these are big shoes to fill, Bar. One of the most interesting people. No. I'm very, you'd be very surprised. I do think ThoughtSpot is one of the most powerful, compelling platforms in the industry, which is one reason why I joined them, coming up on 2 years now. But my role at ThoughtSpot is really to be our customers' coach on helping them unlock the value of data and analytics, executing on their vision for analytics to improve their organizations. So I will say I probably have one of the most interesting jobs in that I get to talk to so many innovative companies really at the leading edge in this industry.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm really looking forward to hearing kind of your perspective, across the industry and sort of across sort of customers that you work with. We'll get to that shortly, but prior to joining ThoughtSpot, so as I mentioned, you were vice president at Gartner, and you founded BI Scorecard, where you basically assessed sort of all sorts of BI and analytics solutions in order to help your customers better understand that landscape. Just curious, sort of out of that work, were there any sort of industry trends that really emerged as surprising to you or something that you really kind of didn't expect through your work there?
Yes, so there's a couple. I mean, if we just look at how does anyone evaluate technology, and how do you evaluate in particular innovations when something is new? We like to compare things. That's really what BI Scorecard was. And at Gartner, that evolved to become a separate research note from the Magic Quadrant called the critical capabilities. And it tries to bring a side-by-side comparison so that an organization can decide what is the best fit for them. Is it ThoughtSpot? Is it Tableau? Is it something as of yet unheard of? And maybe that is one of the biggest surprises to me, is that we still are not good at how to evaluate the new. And I often like to use an analogy. If you think about, so maybe I should ask you, are you an iPhone user, BlackBerry, or Droid, or something else entirely different?
I'm an iPhone user, but my iPhone, I have to say it's like 6 years old or something. So not an up-to-date iPhone user.
Okay, so you're not the bleeding edge.
No, not an early adopter for sure.
But if you think about when the iPhone first came out, people were like, wait, where's my keyboard? Like they were comparing it to the BlackBerry. Or even when the iPad came out, you'd say, wait, where's that USB drive? And again, there's no keyboard. And we are not good at how to evaluate something new. We keep wanting to fit things back into old evaluation frameworks. And I do think as a tech industry, we have to be aware of the limitations of old frameworks and how slowly they move. So you may have, one thing at ThoughtSpot we care about is making analytics easy for everyone. That means taking the concept of consumer grade ease, whether it's something like from Spotify or from your Apple iTunes, and applying that to data and analytics. If nobody's ever thought about that before, it may not even appear on your evaluation list. And this is one thing that surprises me is that we still haven't figured out how to do that any better as an industry.
I love that. Yeah, we have a lot of work to do on that front, it sounds like. But yeah, very cool. Awesome. So in your role today as Chief Data Strategy Officer, it sounds like folks often make the mistake of sort of thinking that you might be responsible for kind of shaping your own company's data culture internally. But actually, interestingly, that's not the case at all. Actually, a lot of your role is sort of focused on, as you mentioned, as a coach to your customers to unlock the value of data and analytics. Could you share a little bit more about sort of the role, what it entails, and maybe what was the genesis of this?
Sure. So it's really, there's three facets to my role. One is working with our top customers in particular, coaching them through where they're getting roadblocks. And a lot of those roadblocks are not technology, it's culture, it's people change management, it's data fluency. So helping them navigate these things. It also might be looking at what's the right tool for the right user and use case, managing that BI tool portfolio. But as I work with them, they will also give me feedback on where we need to take our product to continue to be the best and leading edge in the market. So I work with our product teams on either addressing gaps or the next wave of disruption and innovation. And then the third part is really things like this, Bar, being a thought leader, meeting with people like you. So last year, one of my goals was to launch the Data Chief podcast, which I was able to do with the team, and doing events across the industry, really around thought leadership. I will say, though, we have our own great internal, let's say, data and analytics champion, Snigdha Yah. She just is such a go-getter. And I'm so proud. She's actually like working on her MBA while doing this. But I think one of the things that ThoughtSpot as a company has shown is the way data and analytics really becomes part of everyone's job. So in that way, we don't have one chief data officer internally. We use the phrase, we drink our own champagne. Some people say they eat their own dog food, but we actually even call the internal environment champagne.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so most companies potentially that you sort of work with, or kind of modern companies more broadly, ingest, transform, and process so much data on a daily basis, but really only a very small fraction of this information is actually useful and actually being used. So we sort of see this kind of phenomena of data hoarding, where organizations have tons of data and a growing number of users of that data, but actually that bridge between how do we bring this vast amount of data to users is sort of unbridged today. How do you think data organizations can better kind of cut through the noise and derive more value from their analytics?
Yeah, so you use the term data hoarding, and I don't know, I do almost wonder, are sometimes, I was thinking, are we pack rats at heart? And even maybe worse, perfectionist pack rats. And I know you work in data quality, so I'd love your take on this too, but do we think that the data has to be perfect enough before it can be used? And how have we gotten into the hoarding? I don't know that really we are hoarding so much as the technology lagged. The ability to capture the data was ahead of our ability to get the insights out there. And this is where I do think cloud has changed the game on this, because we can get to more granular insights. So historically, because of limited compute and desktop analytics products, so much of the analyses had to be aggregated and simplified for performance reasons. And running analytics in the cloud, you no longer have to do that. So I think that's part of why we've fallen into this trap of capturing more than actually analyzing. But I think more of that data is relevant than just not useful.
Yeah, we definitely, on sort of the trends that we see, I agree with you on kind of the technology lagging, right? We've seen way more data sources becoming available to organizations, and we're seeing the architecture itself getting way more complex. So organizations have, more systems where they can store data and process it and ingest it. But there's little sort of mechanics or technology to actually make use of it in a more effective way.
Right.
I think we're sort of, we need to catch up, to your point.
Yeah. So your comment about it being more complex, I just published a trends and predictions ebook. And one of the things, it was a survey from IDC that analyzed or realized that more than half the data you need for effective analytics is actually external to what you're capturing internally. Well, you want to talk about messy data, external, there's no common master data. How do you munge it, merge it, harmonize it with your internal data will always be a work in progress.
For sure. So I love that. So often we hear, folks saying, this third party data source kind of like changed the API, it didn't tell us, or, someone added a new data source and that sort of like broke everything downstream, right? It feels like if there's one constant thing in sort of data architecture is change, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we introduce change and move quickly, but still do it in a way that, we have sort of reliable insight. So that's definitely something that we think a lot about at Monte Carlo. For sure.
Yes, I've been reading.
So one of the strong trends was sort of the rise of what you'd call sort of the data cloud has been one of the landmark industry shifts, I would say in the last couple of years. And, with Snowflake's kind of recent IPO signaling the sort of sea change in the adoption of the cloud for the enterprise in particular. Thinking about sort of legacy companies, how can data teams at legacy companies get started on this journey of migrating to the cloud and driving digital transformation? What have you seen sort of works best, if anything?
Yeah, so we can't call them legacy companies, otherwise they're going to be dead or bankrupt.
Fair enough.
We don't want them to become legacy, but maybe we'll call them laggards. HBR uses the term laggards.
Nice.
So I do think about, you always have to align to business outcomes. But I also think now what the pandemic has shown us is that things that you used to think were impossible, like getting to the cloud or putting customer data in the cloud, or even, healthcare private data in the cloud, sharing that data, it's shown us that actually it's quite possible, and it's quite possible to do things faster when you have the business outcome aligned and in mind. If you go to old school processes, and if you let fear and resistance to change slow you down and get in your way, then that is when these organizations will become legacy organizations. And you even see the rate of churn in the Fortune 500 has accelerated. Clayton Christensen talked about this, studied this a lot. The rate of creative destruction, just because you're operating well today, does not mean that you will be the leader tomorrow. I love this quote. Actually, this was from one of the co-founders at Instacart, or maybe he's not a co-founder. I just gave him a promotion at Instacart. I heard him say this on a podcast. Your next competitor actually may be two women in their college dorm room coming up with the coolest startup. Like, the barriers to entry when we have so much more open source and cloud and digital are lowered across so many segments.
For sure. And I think as part of that kind of, making data accessible to everyone, another sort of trend that has emerged is data democratization. I feel like we have a lot of buzzwords in the industry these days, right?
That's not a buzzword. No, that's not a buzzword. That's like, eating healthy and whatever. It's something we have to do. It's to think that data should just stay in the hands of the few experts. I have this image in my mind of the old school telephone operator, the switchboard connector. That's really what has happened, because BI tools were originally so hard to use and required expert training. And that model doesn't scale, and it doesn't help the business people who know the domain, who know the questions they want to ask, be able to get to the insights. There's so much whisper down the line that goes awry, and there's this dashboard backlog that my customers will talk about: the supply-demand imbalance, the demand for new data, more timely insights, more questions, more sophisticated questions, is outpacing the supply of analysts that can answer those questions. So we've got to address that.
One thing that I hear a lot from sort of chief data officers and data leaders is sort of a question around tying this to business outcomes. So you mentioned previously that tying to business outcomes is one of the things that is most helpful in these kind of migrations or driving transformations. And for data leaders that are responsible for important initiatives like data democratization, how do you tie data democratization and things that we have to do, to your point, kind of like eating your veggies, right? We have to do this. This is like staying healthy. How do we tie that to something like business outcomes, right? How do we communicate that to sort of other executives in the organization and use that connection?
Yeah, so this is where I do think the business outcome is the why you're doing something. And I often tell CDOs, analytics leaders, start with your biggest pain point that is also the easiest to do, or start with your highest value opportunity that is, again, easiest to do. You don't want to go with your ultra messy data because people will lose interest, lose faith. So data democratization is just the how. The why is maybe you will say, listen, customer loyalty is number one. And one of the ways we measure that is through NPS scores. And then there's other ways. It might be time to respond to a service request, or on-time delivery, or cross-selling, what have you. But so the why is really about the customer. The how then becomes, we will democratize data so that you can identify who are the service reps that have the lowest NPS scores. And maybe then digging more into the why will be, well, do they have low NPS scores because of training? Or is it maybe that their headset phone is not good if they're in a call center? Things like this. So democratizing data is really an enabler of executing on those business outcomes.
Yeah, I often see sort of organization kind of sink, 3-4 years and $20-30 million into sort of an initiative to kind of bring all the data into one place, or, some other kind of like grand vision around data. But you're right, when it's not sort of tied to, okay, but what's the bottom line here? Am I actually, am I getting more, are the reps more, kind of our customer support reps more productive and making our customers happy, right? Like, how does this actually impact our customers? It's very hard to sort of justify those. So it resonates a lot.
Yeah, so I hope you're not still talking to those customers that are in the 5-year, 3 to 4 year, 5-year planning horizon. That's, okay, you need to stop wasting your time with them. Or let's say, I do believe you need a 5-year vision, or I think 3 years. 5 years, the pace of change. 5 years feels too far now for me. But I'll also say, I do think a lot of times why people start bottoms up is that sometimes change is not coming top down. It can be grassroots. And those data professionals, those technology professionals, they might be the ones that know the art of the possible. So sometimes you might just do a proof of concept, a proof of technology to say, well, we have this data. We think it's a value. Nobody's looking at it. Let me quickly show you the art of the possible. But then finding a champion to say, yeah, this will help improve our business performance, to me is the difference between a technology initiative and really a digital transformation or business initiative.
So shifting gears a bit, I think no matter how kind of great your data warehouse, your data analytics solutions are, it's quite hard to derive meaningful insights if you can't trust it, right? That's one of the things that I see also come up quite often. How have you seen customers tackle sort of data quality, data reliability? What's your kind of take on who's responsible to manage this element of the kind of workflow?
Yeah, trust is a huge issue, and this does get very much into data literacy, or we like to say data fluency. And as I do think data skills will continue to be built up as a must-have skill for the entire workforce. And we're already seeing this as it's being taught increasingly in elementary and junior high. And the SAT now actually includes questions to address somebody's data literacy. But now, if you think about it, most workers are not data literate. And you really could, as unfortunately political as COVID has become, you can also see that people don't understand where the data comes from and what it means. So when you say, hey, there's 10,000 more positive COVID tests, oh my gosh, we have an outbreak. People never really understood, well, that's just who was tested, and the number actually infected is seemingly much higher based on some of these other things. And where you get tested, when the test results come out, this is also where we'll see spikes. So people don't understand that. The more that people understand where the data comes from is how you build trust. And in terms of trusting it with data quality, data will never be perfectly clean. I mean, you can even say, let's take some customer demographic data. Well, do you fill in actually maybe your age, or maybe you leave things out? Data, I like this phrase from one of our data and analytics leaders. They talk more about, is it directionally accurate enough to make decisions on? Now, there's some things that have to be perfect. Your blood type, you have to get that right. But if I'm looking at campaign analytics, and customer experience trends, that we may see a difference.
For sure. And in fact, many sort of strategic business decisions are made based on, incomplete or partial data, right? And you're right. I don't think I've heard anyone say our data is 100% accurate.
Yeah. Well, partial data is a whole nother problem. You look at data gaps, and this is where I look at diversity in tech. We have huge data gaps as it relates to gender, as it relates to minorities. Again, you look at COVID in the early days, we were not tracking the ethnicity of people who were dying. That data actually wasn't even captured, and continues to be not consistently captured either around the world or in the US.
And related to that, actually, a few years ago, you wrote a great article called "We Can Put a Man on the Moon, but We Can't Keep Women in Tech." I love that title, about the business case for diversity in tech, and about what's stopping us from achieving sort of a more equitable workforce. And, increasing sort of diversity and representation in STEM is a huge priority for many data-driven companies, but obviously many of them fall short. I think there's only 15% of today's data scientists are women, according to BCG. In your opinion and perspective, sort of what are some of the best practices or kind of things that we need to do wildly different in order to create a more inclusive industry?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'd like to say, well, since I wrote that blog a year ago or whenever it was, that things have gotten better, but in the pandemic, things have actually gotten worse. And part of it is related to the virtual schooling and women having to really teach from home and work from home, and then also caring for maybe sick parents or siblings. And this is hard. If there's a silver lining, I will say the racial injustices that have happened in 2020 with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I think it has raised the level of the conversation to people saying, we can't just keep talking about this. We actually do need to align it with action. So what I've been pleased to see is that organizations are actually measuring these things more and proactively putting plans in place to address it. Whether, for example, Starbucks now is tying executive compensation to their executives meeting various diversity targets. You also have one of the largest newspaper conglomerates, Gannett, saying where they have data gaps, but also now willing to publicly share this data. NASDAQ is also talking about, they have a proposal to make diversity metrics a requirement to be even listed on NASDAQ. Now, I have a fear, hopefully it'll be misplaced or unfounded fear, that will this backfire, because no minority ever wants to be hired to tick a box. They want to be hired because they're the best person for that job. They just don't want these unconscious biases or systemic biases to get in the way of even being given a shot. I feel like that was a very long-winded answer.
It was a great answer, and I think I really hope there's some silver lining from this year, and that it's folks sort of to your point, the conversation, it's elevated in the conversation, but there's also sort of real actions put behind this, right? I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more companies and organizations do that and lead us in this new age.
Yeah, I hope so. But I do think it has to start earlier, probably middle school. So the more that we can foster, tech, look at you, you're a powerful woman. You said I'm interesting. I don't think I am, but like, I don't think we look like these geeky, we have made tech unattractive to young women. Why? There was a very fascinating, the BBC, the Why Factor, and they traced the root causes back to really when computers, Atari, was marketed as toys for boys. And as that put a whole generation of analytically tech-savvy women off this field. And now it's that, well, gosh, do I really want to walk into another meeting where I'm the only woman in the room or on the Zoom, and my voice won't be heard or my opinion will be discounted? Why do I want to put up with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things that I'm hoping for, sort of two kind of, I would say, maybe positive rays of light that I'm hoping for. One is I've noticed that actually Zoom is a great equalizer in a way. I don't know if you know that, but there's, it's sort of easier to create a more inclusive conversation when everyone has the same volume and the same space in the room, right?
Yes, and I'm seeing survey results being data-driven. I am very much looking at that and seeing that some of the commentary is around that Zoom does seem to be an equalizer. However, I want to make sure that the right people are invited in the Zoom.
Yep.
But then I also see, how you communicating in Zoom or written communication, we lose so much of the nonverbal cues, body language, facial expression on a little thumbnail might be a little harder to read. And so I think time will be the ultimate judge on how much of an equalizer it's been. I will say for sure what it allows is more flexible work options. So I do think if you're a caregiver, then it certainly allows for more asynchronous work. And that's potentially great for working mothers and caregivers who want that.
Yeah. And I really like what you said about sort of starting earlier. I'm very encouraged to hear that, data literacy and data classes is starting as early as SAT or even middle school. I personally got hooked on data. I actually sort of studied sort of physics and math as kind of like 14 years old. And so that's where my kind of passion started from this. And so I think, the earlier that we can kind of bring the education and sort of the data conversation, I actually think data and tech is very cool. I don't know what you're talking about. It's the coolest thing ever.
It is cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. Making it clear to folks earlier is really important. Awesome. So, question for you about specific industry, actually. So ThoughtSpot recently hosted an event with The Economist about how AI is transforming financial services. Now, I think this is specifically relevant to today with just so many fintech companies going public recently, Affirm being sort of the most recent one that comes to mind. What are some of the biggest challenges for the fintech industry in particular in your mind when it sort of comes to kind of harnessing the potential of analytics and AI?
Yeah, so fintech is an exciting space. Financial services in general, I love this commentary from the head of AI at JP Morgan that really we have to get financial services right as it relates to AI and data and analytics, because this ties to income, it ties to financial equity, all of these things I think are so exciting. I do think this is one of the areas where privacy and trust are at historic lows. So if the credit card companies are just, or even the payment companies are selling your data and not being transparent about it, then I think this will continue to be a challenge.
Yeah, data trust is something that's sort of definitely top of mind for sort of folks across and for financial services in particular. I like that quote for JP Morgan.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So just to kind of cap it off, a couple of sort of rapid fire questions or sort of brief questions. Curious, what was your favorite book in 2020?
Okay, well, I'm an avid reader, so I can't say there's just one, and I got the left brain, right brain going on. So
you can choose two.
Well, I have this book club with friends. So on the fiction side, I loved The Giver of Stars, it's about the pack horse librarians in Kentucky, and American Dirt. And then from the business and analytics side, I really liked John Thompson's Building Analytics Teams. But then the culture map from, I think it's Aaron Meyer, really how people work differently, working with customers around the world, and as a global company ourselves, just understanding the way Europeans versus Brazilians and Americans and Indians communicate and work. I really liked both of them.
I did not read either of those, so I'm really looking forward to it. That's great. What about podcasts or newsletters? Do you have any favorites that you've learned of this year?
Yeah, so podcasts, I do listen to Snowflakes, the rise of the data cloud. If I'm allowed to say, I love the guests that have so willingly shared their inspiration on the Data Chief. So I actually listen to it after it's recorded. So I listen to those IT visionaries. I listen to, clearly I have to add yours to the list now too. And then for motivation, of course I listen to Brene Brown.
Oh, I love Brene Brown. Such great books and podcasts. Yeah.
Oh, and newsletter. So newsletter, I'm so bad with names, but the author of Atomic Habits, I just started subscribing to his newsletter. Really good.
Nice. Yeah, I don't remember the author, but I agree with you. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
How about Netflix? What's next in your Netflix queue?
Well, Netflix, I started watching The Judge, and then I got to episode 2, and I'm like, this is really dark. So my husband and I have been debating, we have to retry The Crown because everyone said it was great, but I found the first few boring. I loved Queen's Gambit. That was really good.
So if you could have dinner with any other chief data officer or just more broadly data leader in the world, who would it be and why?
Yes, so probably two parts. One would be the new CDO of the CDC that we still don't have. And they put that ad out, was it March or April? So that just pains me. So then I'd have to say, I don't know the name, but is there a CDO? Israel actually has been doing better in getting the vaccine to more people. And I would love to know, I understand that data is the heart of that, but I don't know the person that is actually doing that.
I will have to look into that then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that. And I'm looking forward to the CDO or for the CDC as well. Seems like it's
Yeah.
about time.
Yeah, would be good.
Yeah.
I could always say the Green Bay Packers, but I think we're already connected anyway.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Cindi. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was awesome to hear your insights. And thank you so much for sharing this with our listeners.
Yeah, my pleasure, Bar. Great talking to you. Thanks for having me.